Hi, everyone. We're just starting now. Nargis, did you want to kick off?
Sure. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. How are you guys doing? Thank you so much for being here today. I know that you guys, it's kind of early for some of you, but this is a workshop. It'll be great if we can see what you're doing. And we're very pleased to have Anna Mendivia from Maison Verte, the greenhouse. I just looked it up, by the way. I don't know what it meant. With us. And yeah, we are expecting some more people, so I don't know where they are. I don't know if we should wait. What do you guys think? Should we just get started with our intro first, and then we hope that everybody will join us in time?
We're waiting on, I think, 5 more people, right?
Yeah, I think around 5. So we had 17 for the workshop, and then 4 of us, or 3 of us. So.
I think we should get started.
Yeah, let's start with the intro, and then they can join. Let's do another check-in again after that.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to pass it on to Anna Mendivia for you guys to do your own intro. I'll pin your video if you want, and we'll get started.
Sure. Can pin the center of peace and advancement screen. Hello.
Hi, everyone.
I'm Anam.
And I'm Divya, and we are Maison Verte. Maison Verte is a social enterprise focused on improving food security and food accessibility. The way we're trying to tackle this problem is by taking on different types of projects and within our 3 pillars, which are community, research, and education. These projects include hosting interactive workshops, building tools, marketing local produce, collaborating with food system experts, building indoor growing systems, and designing sustainable growth plans. We want to empower people to create accessible and regenerative food systems. If you are interested in learning more about how you can grow at home or learn more about what we're working on, you can always check out our website, which is www.mverte.ca, or you can email us at hello@mverte.ca. Was there another introduction? Nargis, did you want to give another introduction to your kickoff?
No, we were going to go with a quick poll before you guys start. Yeah?
Okay, perfect.
All right, I'll kick off the poll then. There you go, just launched it. Feel free to do that yourselves, girls, Divya and Anam. Okay, guys, should I wrap it up?
Yes.
Oh, are we muted or not?
There we go. 8 out of 13 really wanted to attend this class. How about the rest of, what do you mean kinda? You're gonna be in trouble if we're saying that. Okay, yes, all of you got that right, Candle. All of them was the correct answer. They all have 28 days. Wow, all these varieties of ice cream. I would have chosen strawberry swirl myself. Okay, maybe we should all meet for ice cream after this. Holiday break. Wow, most people would rather have all languages. I'd rather speak to animals, just letting you know. Okay, here we go. Off to you guys. Get started.
Perfect. So we're going to kick off our presentation on critical thinking, food and the environment. So let me know when you can see our screen.
Are we still visible? Okay.
Can everyone see our screen?
Yep. Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so just to kick off, we're going to do a quick agenda. So for today's session, we're going to quickly go through, well, not very quickly, but we're going to go through food for thought. We want to talk a little bit about where the concept of food systems came from. So understanding a bit of the history behind there, understanding a bit about agriculture in Canada today, and then looking at how we're trying to improve food security today. After that, we're going to have a quick break and we'll move into growing microgreens. So again, this will be the hands-on component of our workshop. We'll walk through what exactly is a microgreen, what exactly is a nutrition scoop, a bit about the supplies and hygiene, seed prep, then the actual hands-on workshop, harvesting and storing, and a couple of different recipes. and then we'll have a Kahoot, and then we'll debrief and have a Q&A.
So keep an eye on our notes. We're going to be quizzing you guys on that afterwards.
And if you have any questions, just put your hand up or write something in the chat. We're happy to answer. We'll have a few discussions throughout the presentation. So let's start with, what are food systems? These are the components that are connected to create the foundation of food systems. The overall theme of understanding how society grows and changes and benefits from harnessing food systems. We're going to take you through the journey of how we developed, how we have developed, and where we are now, and how we have improved. Food security is the quality, quantity, availability, and accessibility of food. So some of these factors are where and how food are grown, how is it transported and how far, economic and environmental circumstances, the demands of the population, accessibility of food, the social welfare of the population. Just keep this in mind in the back of your head as we go through the rest of the presentation. It's very important.
And just to give you a scope of what all a food system incorporates is every stage of the cycle, from where the plant is grown or your vegetable or even livestock is grown, all the way to where it's processed, how it reaches you through transportation, where you buy it, so how you access it, your consumption is at home, as well as how it ends up in a landfill or is wasted at the farm. So those key components.
So we want to quickly think about, now you have an understanding that like there's this system where all like food is connected and moved across, a chain of events. We want to look at like, how has agriculture shaped today's society, since these food systems have existed for so long. So nomadic cultures were originally hunters and gatherers. They relied on the collection of wild grains like barley and wheat and rice, hunting for meat. When these early humans began farming, they were able to produce enough food that they no longer had to migrate to their food source. So this was a transition of going from being a hunter and gatherer to actually having a system of farming in place. So they went from actually going and looking for food into having it localized where they could start developing their own produce. Once they figured that they no longer had to migrate, that meant that they could build these permanent structures and they could develop villages and towns and eventually even cities. So you think about these like early livestock that existed, like they include things like wheat, barley, peas, lentils, chickpeas, rice, sugarcane, potatoes, maize, bananas, sheep, goats, pigs. Like farming is not only produce, but it's actually livestock as well. Closely connected to this, like the rise of these like settled societies, was an increase of population. So they had the ability to farm, also meant the ability to control the amount of food that was produced within that region, which meant, for the first time in history, there was like a surplus of food. This is a theme that we're going to continuously see throughout the presentation. It's essentially, like this meant that there was going to mean like less fatal injuries, like people had access to better nutrition, they were able to improve their health overall. And this was just something that was common amongst those like nomadic societies, which actually led to these like going from these small settlements to these sizable cities. So with all these efficiencies, farming became this skill set. It was no longer something that you did because you needed it to keep you alive. Now it was like a form of like economic development. So a few people set out to develop these skill sets where others had the time to do something else. There's like a division of labor to help develop that society. So if you think about it, agriculture is actually the backbone of civilization. And those who had like the best systems in place had the most economic development at that point of time.
So think of those societies like the Indus Valley, the Mesopotamian Sumer, ancient Egypt, like what do those all have in common when we think about them in history? Those were the main civilizations that really nailed down and intensified their agricultural processes and were able to grow and focus their attention on those other societal benefits because they're free of thinking about food.
So moving on to the next slide. Okay, so now we think about, here's early stages of farming development and how they've changed societies. Like people taking on the mindset that you only need a few people to grow a lot of food. And if they grow a lot of food, they're able to essentially have a larger population and way more production and better economic output. So we moved from this mindset into something called the Green Revolution, food industrialization, and scaling this efficiency. We went from just being, having the first aqueduct to having the first grinding water mill, and then going into crop rotations. And then we went into a Columbian exchange where people, Christopher Columbus literally, moved potatoes from one part of the world to another part of the world. And now this other part of the world could cultivate tubers or potatoes. We went into pasteurization, refrigeration, tractors, and mechanization. We went into fertilizers, pesticides, and eventually this huge boom of like mass scaling of food through monoculture. And so you might be wondering, like, what exactly are these things that I just spoke to? They're essentially different types of tools and processes and inventions that people have created just to kind of hone in on scaling and improving the food cycle and being able to develop without compromising their food. So essentially this is like a common trend throughout history. It helped with growing populations. It helped with securing the amount of food production. It helped with being able to say that you could guarantee a crop would be available. So that's something to kind of see, like, first we figured out how to pretty much farm, which meant that you didn't have to migrate. And then they went into figuring out different tools and different processes and different ways to being able to expand that. So from there, like, what happened? We're gonna quickly just talk about agriculture in Canada today and kind of like think about this trend and how we see it in Canada today. So in Canada, our top agriculture products are canola, cattle, calves, beef, veal, vegetables, and poultry. Like we are able to optimize based off our climate. We're able to optimize based off our availability of what can grow within a region, depending on where people are. We're so efficient at doing this that we're great exporters of our agricultural products across the world. We have more than $60 billion every year is pretty much profited from exporting agricultural products. And every year, these farmers are now under pressure to produce more food. So now they've set the benchmark and they have to try and meet it and beat it year over year. So while they're doing this, they're caring for their livestock, land, water on top of their farms. And like they're facing these challenges, which include crop protection, soil conservation, labor, climate change, and health. So you can see that the problems are no longer about how much necessarily, they're not about going and finding the food. Now it's about, how do I retain the quality of my land to be able to keep producing this agricultural output. So the chart that you're looking at, it actually shows how many farms have grown over a year, like year over year, over the last like 50, 60 years. So you can see that the farms have grown by a substantial acreage and as well production. Before they used to have a crop diversity, and then they started focusing on single farms. Like rarely you'll hear about a farm that isn't focused on, for example, cattle production or dairy production or wheat. Whereas like now, we have 14 times as much wheat as we did in the 60s and 70s because we only have single farms that just focus on wheat itself.
Another thing to notice on this graph is that while the amount of food being produced per acre is increasing, the number of farms is actually decreasing because we're having situations where instead of one family owning a farm, there's now like large groups of people or corporations that own these farms, and they'll own like, instead of a 100-acre farm, they'll own like a 500-acre farm, and they'll be using that. And then there's also, as you can see along the bottom, there's a lot of mechanization. There's a lot of efficiency that we've gained by using machines to do a lot of the hard work, and that's also helped to reducing the labor force in farming.
So very few people actually have the skill set today, which was something that was necessary for everybody to have hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And they're able to perfect it to the point where food production is no longer an issue. There is food surplus that exists globally. And now we have other issues that we need to consider. So given that, actually, let's take a moment to answer any questions. I'm seeing a couple of different,
maybe more to the side.
Sorry, we're just taking a moment to figure out where our questions are.
Was there any like terms or anything that we used that was new for you guys that you want us to explain so far? Can you try it there and then chat?
So you were saying that the number of lands have actually number of farms have gone down, but the production has increased. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes, and people have become more efficient based off the tools that we've created as societies.
Is there a con to that?
That's going to be one of our discussion topics.
Think about that, like at the back of your minds, like instead of having more diversity, we have like specialization in like fewer types of crops that we can guarantee, but what are the drawbacks of something like that? Another term I just want to double check everyone knows is, does everyone know what like exports and imports are? Basically exporting means like stuff that we grow or like produce in Canada and we're sending overseas to like America or somewhere else. And import means like we're bringing it in.
So
yeah, we can, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying we have a couple of questions in chat.
So does this impact the livelihood of farmers? Yes, it does. Like, I think we started from it was almost a task that we all had to like go a job, right? And so within this job, farmers are faced with the constraints of having to protect their land. They have to figure out how can they reassure that the crops that they're producing year over year stays the same, while having like some form of finite resource, right? Which is their soil, which is the weather. So there's, I guess, an economic pressure from how we've built societies over a period of time. And that pressure is on farmers to be able to produce that sustainably.
Like you can see that over here on this chart, like in 1990 it was much in the 1900s there was like less amount of like profit that was gained from farming, but we also need to take into account, because we're growing more, there's a bigger population. It's not clear, like, are we making more money through agriculture or not? We are trying to make it more efficient though.
Yeah, so another question is, can you elaborate on the Green Revolution? I'm confused what happened then. So the Green Revolution was when we started using fertilizers and pesticides to have sustainable output of wheat. So for example, like a crop might be exposed to different types of pests, which kind of pose it at some sort of risk. But when you use tools or chemicals to prevent that from happening, then you can guarantee what that crop is. So the whole point of industrializing food and the Green Revolution was to be able to scale substantially from something that we've slightly improved on year over year, or sorry, not year over year, but like decades after decades after decades. So like, I think the way you want to look at the Green Revolution was a point where we looked at introducing like heavy machinery, looking at like monoculture. So one farm dedicated to just growing wheat and growing wheat really well. So we'll actually elaborate a little bit more on that in the next couple of slides. Like, we want you to think about what happens when you have food surplus, and the whole objective is no longer about having something potentially like sustainable, but about economic output. So you have to think about the balance of the two.
Yeah.
Then the next question, does the Industrial Revolution hurt the sustainability provided by farming? I think that's always been a really key debate that people have had, because if you think about sustainability, it could mean many things, right? Like it could mean, you know, do we have enough food, right? It could mean that, I'm trying to think of what else.
So like
distribution. Like have we created new distribution channels using this industrial way of producing food?
At the end of the day, like if we're trying to think about it, what's our goal? Like think back to the nomadic situation, right? Like we're trying to be as efficient as possible with growing our food so that we have enough to support our population. So if it means that we can use machines to do stuff faster, and that's like an industrial revolution, that's not necessarily a bad thing for sustainability, because it now means we can grow more food than we previously could, right? So having a mix and choosing what are the right decisions, that's where sustainability comes in. Like what are the processes that help us move forward? For example, we do have that improved mechanization, but then there's a debate saying like, is it even good in the first place to be growing this much wheat? Like we've got so much wheat, but is that a healthy part of our diet? Like, should we be mixing it with different types of grains? Should we be eating more vegetables rather than just wheat?
The other thing is that what is the motivation of people, right? Like, is it, you know, when you think about, again, going back to building tools to help with the division of labor, what that allowed people to do was to, again, stay put in a single area, develop these like very intricate societies, being able to put their efforts and thoughts towards like engineering and development in other areas. So sustainability itself is like a very complex word. There's no good and bad in this situation. It's just a lot of critical thinking when you're looking at how farming is done and how the motivations of people have changed over time.
I guess one quick question we could just pose in the chat box is, there's 3 factors for sustainability. If you guys can like give a shot at like writing what those 3 things are and keep those in mind. So if you want to share in the chat, there's 3, one of them is environment, but what are the other 2 pieces of it? And while you write that, we'll continue the presentation.
And maybe I'll give you some inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about, this probably directly feeds into some of the questions that we just saw, but let's talk about the environmental impact trade-off of increased efficiency on global food systems. So we focus so much attention on becoming efficient, using these tools to be able to grow more and more and more, because we initially understood that if you grow more, then you can invest your time into doing something else that's better for your society. So what does that, like, what is the cost of that? Like, what is the environmental impact there? Does everyone know what an opportunity cost is? Like the trade-off of time versus money? So we're gonna just talk quickly about this environmental impact trade-off. When we look at our systems and the impact of where they are today, the visualization here shows a summary of some of the main global impacts. Food accounts over a quarter, 26% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Half of the world's habitable ice and desert-free land is used for agriculture. 70% of global fresh water withdrawals are used for agriculture. 78% of global ocean and freshwater eutrophication, the population of waterways with nutrient-rich populations, is caused by agriculture. 94% of mammal biomass, excluding humans, is livestock. That means livestock outweighs wild mammals by a factor of 15 to 1. Of the 28,000 species that are evaluated to be threatened with extinction on the IUCN Red List, agriculture and aquaculture are listed as a threat for 24,000 of them. So those are pretty significant impacts, and not to mention deforestation. That's huge, and that's globally. So in Canada, like the impact is about 35 to 38% of the food loss is between 35 to 58% of food is lost or wasted. as food makes its way through the food system, there are many causes of food loss and food waste. 13% is actually not harvested, 10% is packaged and transported, 12% is from retail, 30 to 38% is household and restaurants. So like what exactly does that mean? It means that people are stocking too much food that it spoils before it can be eaten and sold. Storage and packaging that is not able to stop food spoilage and contamination, and disposing food scraps in the garbage instead of in the collection bins for organic waste. So if you think about it, like we live in a society where we are so privileged to see abundance, but that abundance is causing a lot of waste and leaks in the system that isn't considered because our mindset is focused on abundance and efficiency.
So to answer everyone's question on what sustainability are, the 3 pillars are, Halima got it correct. It's environment, economy, and close with health, it's basically social. So anything that impacts humans' welfare. So I think that leads into what the next part is. What's the social impact?
Yeah, so I think we started this discussion already. How has industrialization impacted this food quality? The Green Revolution of the 60s and 70s is commonly credited with saving millions, if not billions, from starvation and malnutrition. Going back to the idea of the goal of being efficient and having abundance, to the point where we have food surplus, and this surplus is something that we have to now consider managing. So more food was being produced than ever before, but the quality of modern food is a heavily debated topic. So think about that, modern food. What exactly do we mean by modern food here? There was like an emphasis of that emphasis that was placed on providing necessary caloric output, but at the expense of nutrition, right? Like in the past, and you can see how food and nutrition has changed over the last 100 years. We focused on, for farmers that have like a lot of heavy lifting, they do a lot of physical activity, like their diet and what they need to eat to fit their nutrition is different than most of us today, which take on service jobs and are not as mobile, right? So in the past, like that focus and attention wasn't there for nutrition. When this green revolution was happening, we prioritize yield over that nutrition. We emphasize on this high output of crops rather than diversity. So a lot of people were eating just wheat, potentially not even understanding what exactly is a carb or a fat or like a protein in that sense. Not understanding the difference between the sugar or different types of fat even.
Vitamins.
Vitamins, micronutrients, macronutrients, like there was no real emphasis on that because the concept was to focus on this output so we had enough to eat to begin with. And there's a higher prevalence of pesticides on foods. So that reliance on mechanization posed this potential challenge. If food production technologies are compromised, will we have like enough food in the future? Like how do we prevent that, and how can we ensure that our output will always be great? So we're actually going to stop there and have a discussion. So what we'll do is we'll split everyone out into breakout rooms where you can pick a topic. What are the trade-offs of GMOs versus organic? Does efficient food production equal food security? And what are the nutritional trade-offs of mass food production? So we're gonna split everyone up and you'll have a group and you have to decide on a topic. You'll have 10 minutes to discuss the topic and then 5 minutes to present your findings to the rest of the...
Pick one person that's gonna come back and share. Before we split up, is there any term on the screen that we need a quick recap of what it means? Like, is everyone confident with what food security means?
So you're asking GMO versus organic is going to be one discussion, right?
Yeah.
For one group?
Yeah, so they would pick topic 1, 2, or 3, and then from there present on the topic that they've selected.
Okay, how are we going to organize that each group is doing a different topic, or does it matter?
I think it's
They can-
flexible. You can all choose.
Yeah, you can pick.
Or does it give you a breakout room number or anything like that?
I'll organize the breakout rooms if you want. Should I put one of you in each room?
Sure.
Sure.
And how many
Or
rooms?
actually no, because we only have one laptop.
Yeah. Or I can go into that room. Maybe I'll use Telha's.
Actually, no, it's okay. We'll stay out of it.
Yeah.
But if there are questions, like you can send us messages.
How many people in the room? How many rooms do you want, like for 13 people?
3.
3 rooms, please.
Okay. Is everybody ready to go? Like, do you have any questions?
And it would be 10 minutes long.
10 minutes long. So keep an eye on your time. I'm selecting the rooms now. And you guys are going to all be in those rooms. You guys are keeping track of the time, right? I'm going to join one of the rooms.
If I remember correctly. I feel like we didn't talk about one as much, so maybe we can talk about that. Yeah. Okay, so what are the trade-offs of GMO versus organic?
So we all understand what GMOs are, right? Like how they're modified.
So I feel like we see a lot of GMOs being used without like realizing it. Like a lot of our crops have GMOs. A lot of our the farmers use pesticides that have GMOs because it helps with the efficiency of this food, right? Like of farming and of everything like that. So I feel like it could be a misunderstood concept, but it might also have implications.
Right, because technically the act of influencing the genes of organisms has existed for thousands of centuries because farmers, they like selectively breeded a certain individuals of a species with certain desirable traits in order to gain those traits in later populations. Like for example, they selectively breeded like certain wolves who displayed like submissive characteristics.
Hi, Nargis.
Hi.
Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had a great discussion.
Let's give some time we have 15 people on the call, right?
Yes.
We'll wait for everyone to join back.
Any team want to volunteer to go first?
We could go first.
Okay, perfect.
So I was in a group with Fatima and Maison, and we were discussing the trade-offs between GMOs and organic products. So there are definitely a variety of pros and cons for each, and some of the main ones that we thought about and also researched were that GMO products are great because they have a lot of additional nutritional benefits. It's great because in countries where, or even in locations where healthy food is not as accessible, or it requires more cost and more labor to produce, the introduction of GMOs will, I guess, ease that kind of thing. We also understood that with GMOs, it's definitely a newly emerging technology, and there have been issues associated with it, like, like chronic diseases and allergic reactions, which is obviously an issue and it has to be studied further. With organics, we obviously know that they have a huge history with our civilization and the Green Revolution and all of that. And so because of that, we know how to cultivate organic products, but they're definitely more costly, not only for consumers to purchase, but also for farmers to produce as well. And then with organic products, you have the issue of they're more costly because obviously when you have something that's genetically modified, it's definitely going to be better than what it naturally is. So that is some of the pros and cons that we see, but definitely GMOs have potential in the future for accessibility, and definitely countries where certain types of food are not as accessible, but there's trade-offs for both.
That's a really great summary.
We have some questions for you. What do you think are the risks that GMOs can pose on a society that consumes GMOs, and why are organics expensive?
Well, for society that was strictly consumed what we would call antibiotic resistance, and when you're kind of modifying things to such an extent where it can obviously has a bunch of scientific connotations. I don't really know too much about it, but that definitely has that issue with it as well. And then also we just don't know too much of GMOs and their long-term impacts. So it is potentially possible that people because firstly they go bad earlier, and so you have that additional cost of trying to keep up with when the food is going to be rot, and then when it's going to reach people's tables, if that makes sense. So you have that additional issue of making sure that the food gets to people quicker before it rots. Also, they're more expensive because when something is genetically modified, it has the added benefits of that genetic improvement. And so a lot of the issues with organic products that may not be as good, or makes them rot earlier, or makes them go bad, all that kind of stuff, when you have to, I guess, keep up with that obviously has that additional cost. I hope that answers.
No, that was great.
Well done.
Does anyone have a question for this team?
I guess my only question is, are there any cons to organic food outside the fact that it's costly?
Definitely. So one of the issues that Halima touched on is the cost of it going bad or spoiling. So it actually takes more land to grow the same amount of food in an organic farm than it would to grow on a GMO farm. So when you're thinking again about the land use, the amount of resources like water, all of those things, you can potentially, although on the surface level it seems like GMOs are more environmentally degrading, organics are very also heavy users of our environmental resources, and every single one of these processes needs a balance and check to make it truly sustainable. The other issue with organic is that for society, if you're not able to afford organic food, then you can't eat it. So then how do we give people access to all of those nutritious foods if the variety that we can with GMOs and also organic?
Another polling question. Does anyone know, or just even if you want to just chime in, does anyone know the difference between non-GMO and organic, or are they the same?
I think for non-GMO, you can still use preservatives and stuff, versus an organic, you don't. GMO just refers to genetically modified, so that element is taken out, but all the other things are still present.
Yeah, good.
Perfect.
And so did any other group choose a different topic that they'd like to give a quick summary of as well?
Who wants to go next?
Mm-hmm. Even if it's
I'll
the
go,
same
I
topic.
guess. Yeah, no, so we chose the second topic, which is the how food like efficiency does it lead to food security. And I think
Who's in
for
your
the
team?
yeah, so within our team, yeah, and Mashal and then Rana and there was a Yusuf and also one more person. I'm just trying to get the name.
Raise your hands, guys. Who was on her team? Raise your hands.
I think Ibrahim was the other person.
Oh, it was me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I had
Sorry,
nothing to
Ray.
contribute to that conversation, so I didn't say anything.
No, but basically, we discussed how like food security is definitely present because of it. So there's more food available, and that's why in our modern society, like the Western world or like the developed societies, there's not a lot of worries about starvation or malnutrition. But then Rana did mention how basically there's still places in the world like developing countries that don't have that food security, even though like you guys mentioned there's still a surplus of food in the world. There's more than enough being produced, but it's all about accessibility and how it's not reaching the right people. And I don't want to get too political either because you guys start hating me, but then basically it's also about like the power struggle. So like the developed countries are hoarding all the food, and the developing countries don't get that food security. So it doesn't, I think, equally translate exactly, but there's definitely, it's present, yeah.
There's
So,
also
question for you.
yeah.
Why do you think the developing country, like your statement on hoarding food, right? How does that happen? Like, why is it one country has more versus another country has less?
I guess it's about money too, like who can afford to keep it and who can't. I guess all the places that require food, the food that reaches them, like for example, Yemen or whatever, it's through charity and through philanthropy. Because also, I guess it's about production. So the States is producing more food, so they get to keep all that food. Mexico gets to export a lot of food. So all these things, I guess.
There's also examples like Haiti, for example, where they have very like big agricultural production. However, they can't afford to keep it. They have to export all that food to places like Canada or like the States so that they can support their own economy. So although they have enough food, they are not able to access or eat it.
And I think this goes back to the definition of how those like 3 pillars of sustainability, it's not just about the environment that you live in, it's about, you know, your economic and your social, the social aspects. Like when you're in places like Yemen or whatever, you're exposed to such there's like a political exposure that you kind of lose control of your land, even if it was fruitful. And same thing with Haiti. I saw somebody raise their hand. Did they want to ask a question? Anyone else want to contribute to the conversation or ask a question?
Yeah, I just want to say like you guys mentioned about the thing about like Haiti, they have like they grow a lot of food, but a lot of them just can't afford it because a lot has to be exported. So like I just thought of the example of like quinoa and like avocado. Like for example, quinoa used to be a very cheap grain, and I don't know where it's grown, but it used to be a staple from like where it's from for people there. But then due to like quinoa becoming like a superfood and everyone jumping on like the quinoa bandwagon, people just can't afford quinoa anymore, which is quite. People who just grow it can't afford it, which is quite messed up. And same thing with avocado, I feel.
That's a really good point as well.
Yeah, like the balance between being able to feed the people around you versus being able to make some sort of economic profit through exports. Okay, so team 3.
What did you guys talk about?
I'm guessing we're team 3, but
Yeah.
we did what team 1 did, like I think it was like what's the trade-off between GMO and organic. And so we talked almost exactly what Halima said, everything like from bacteria resistance to everything, but we also talked about like the degradation of the land and kind of like that possible impact of my Wi-Fi. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah.
But like the degradation of the land and kind of how that impacts it. And we talked about how sometimes like the things that are discussed within organic, like, oh, these eggs are like from free range, like non-cage, like properly fed chicken. We're like, isn't that should be the bare minimum sometimes, right? But because of like the industry of agriculture, sometimes it's not, we don't see that, right? Or actually most of the time we don't see that, and we're not conditioned, but we are used to the system where we see like that abuse of animals kind of normalized. And so that's the trade-off between like, and so I feel like that's a lot where the price of organic comes from as well, is that like that promise of the animals are also being treated right. And so the quality is better. Other than that, you basically said the same thing.
No, that's really good. That's another really important thing. Like, what are your thoughts on the way cities are structured, where now instead of having like farms close by where you can see how your food is produced, and now they're like out on the outskirts or maybe like several kilometers away, in comparison. So it's kind of desensitized us in exactly the same way you're describing. We don't know where our meat comes from. We don't know what conditions it's growing in. So what could it be like a flaw in the way cities are structured, and how can we kind of bring food back closer to us?
And I think that's kind of like the thing with living in like large cities, is that when in agriculture communities, you grow your food and then you eat your food and you take what you need from it, and then you like, you know, create a system. But because we're dependent on how the city does it, how the city farmers do it, we don't really know we don't know if what we're eating, like the milk that we drink, is it proper hormones that the milk we're getting is like pure, or is it because it is injected with all these things and then our body is not able to break it down and has like allergic reactions to the point where people just cut out calcium or like dairy as a whole for their better health, you know? And so that's health, that's an impact of health that happens on humans as well.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to mention something. I go to buy my chicken from an organic place, and the chicken is really small. So I always say to him that you charge more, but it's a smaller chicken. And he said, you're not really supposed to be eating that much chicken. And because people eat so much chicken, the other people who are not eating organic, we have to provide more for them. So we inject them with hormones and pesticide and have to grow them big and fat. So you guys can be satiated. You're not supposed to have like chicken every day or meat every day either. So that really made sense, you know, that, yeah, we are overeating, and that's why there has to be more production, and hence they have to use means which are not natural to produce more.
That's a great point. Like, people used to eat meat once a week or like a couple times a month, and now we're got it for almost 3 meals a day in comparison. So there's definitely some kind of imbalance. And
has anyone ever tasted the difference between like, for example, a tomato bought from Argentina versus a tomato grown in your garden?
I have, yeah. The one in the garden is amazing.
Yeah, like the taste is different, the texture is different, the shelf life is different, the look and feel is different. Like, and there's a reason why, right? Like the nutrients that you're getting from something that's been preserved for so long, that's grown for mass scale, is very different than something that's grown for just nutrients and livelihood of like a sole person.
You think of it this way too, like the tomato that's coming from overseas, it's gonna be picked off the vine a little earlier. So I hated tomatoes until my neighbor gave me organic tomatoes, and I was like, this has a flavor, it tastes good, it's juicy.
Yeah, but it's sweet.
Like a tomato that's been on the grocery shelf, it'll be green when they pick it, and by the time it reaches the grocery store, then it like kind of ripens, and because of that, it loses all of its flavor. It's just optimized for storage on your shelf.
Do you guys want to give us a list of your favorite vegetables?
Yeah, but with tomatoes, I also read a whole article on when it's being transported from the farm, the green tomato, to the shelf of the supermarket. They have to put gases on it to make it red from the outside, so that it's something you buy, although it's not even ripe inside.
Yeah,
it's true. Yeah,
empty. That's the thing. Like, we're just it goes back to, we're optimizing for calories versus nutrition. So it's just filling our bellies with like a thing, but not like getting the nutrients from it.
I just wanted to say two things, sorry, based off the discussion. One was talking about how often we eat meat. So like back in hunter-gatherer days, like when our bodies evolved for thousands of years, because the agricultural revolution is pretty recent if you think about the whole like millennia of civilization or whatever. So back in the day, like you had to like hunt for game, and you would maybe find like a sheep or an antler or like some sort of meat in like once a week, and then you make that last, and then you like scavenge for berries or whatever. And so that your main diet composed of vegetables or like fruits versus not meat. But now so fast, because of like industrial revolution or because of the agricultural revolution, we started eating so much meat every single day. Our bodies are not even capable of handling it, and it's causing so many problems, including of course obesity and all of these other like cholesterol and whatever. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. The other thing I wanted to hear your thoughts on was a lot of people say that the reason why we think organic is expensive is because we've normalized the fact that fast food is so cheap. So to us, technically, organic food is supposed to be the original price. It's not supposed to be expensive, and then the rest of the things have become cheap. So I guess it's coming from a point of privilege for sure. But yeah, do you think that's true, or like?
Yeah, that's totally true. Like you have, when you look at fast food, you look at scaling, and when you scale something out, the price just drops dramatically. And if you can scale out something that's so preserved and like this is going to be a little bit harsh, but like robbed of like nutrients, then you will see that like price disparity, which will eventually cause people to just not like normalize that. Like, oh, why does this cost more than? Why does a burger cost more than $3? Like say if you're going to McDonald's and getting something from like the junior chicken sandwich or something, right? But like realistically, like food has never been that cheap, especially nutrients. And I think because nutrients is not something that people can visualize and see, like it's hard for a person to see the value of eating, for example, a tomato that has a substantial amount of nutrients that's like 50 cents more than a tomato that doesn't, right? So I think it's a bit of like that where we've scaled the cost of food of things that don't hold nutrients, and now we have this expectation. But then the other end of it is that the way we look at things, the way it's marketed to us or sold to us, like we have a hard time justifying the cost of something. And I'll give you another example that's unrelated to food, but for example, a person might go out of the way to buy like an iPhone, like the newest iPhone, because it's marketed, they can see the value of what it is, but they might not do the same for education, like taking a course that's $1,000, because there is no tangible evidence of what it is. And it's hard to conceptualize the value you receive from that $1,000 of education sometimes.
Yeah. Another trade-off, again, like just leading off of that same point, is the time, right? So if you are seeing that you can go and grab a complete meal, you can grab your meat, your salad, your carbohydrates in the form of a burger, then you aren't going to want to go and spend your time on buying all of those fresh ingredients individually, and you're saving time and you're saving money. So often people will just defer to fast food for that reason. Okay, should we?
So we're gonna jump back into the presentation, but this is an amazing discussion. So let's get back into it. So thank you everyone for sharing. It was really great hearing the stuff that you've researched, and just your opinions on the matter.
It's a few slides up, right?
Yeah, and so now we're gonna just talk about like with all this food production efficiency, why are we still facing food insecurity? So we talked a lot about, you know, having food, commercializing food, becoming super efficient at creating food, to the point where we have surplus. Oh, is there a question? Oh. So, yes, so with all of this, the production of food, and becoming super efficient at it, why are we still facing food insecurity? So food insecurity, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, is measured by food availability, food access, food utilization, and food stability within the food supply chain. So when you think about food availability, it is when people have food and food networks within the vicinity. Food networks are places like grocery stores, farmers markets, and other spaces where you can buy food, maybe even like a convenience store. Food accessibility refers to whether people can actually obtain that food. So now that it's in place somewhere, can you actually obtain it? Is it affordable? Like this is like where people can consistently and easily purchase food. In some cases, neighborhoods can have food available, but community members may not be able to access that food. This tends to happen when food networks in the vicinity are expensive. There's a lot of research that's done in this specific area. Like, for example, we'll talk about this a little bit later with food landscapes. But essentially, there are areas where people don't make a lot of money, but the food within that region is super expensive, so they don't really have the option. And like food accessibility, it might not look the same to everyone. You might not see it at all. The Institute of Food Insecurity and Policy Research describes food insecurity in levels. Like if you are marginally food insecure, it could look like you're worrying and running out of food or having to limit the selection of food that you purchase. If you're moderately insecure, it could look like having to compromise the quality or the quantity of the food that you purchase. If you are severely food insecure, it could also look like missing meals, reducing your food intake, even going days without food. So just a poll question, but can you think about how many Canadians are facing food insecurity?
Like give a percentage, probably that's easier.
Yeah, in a percentage form. And to give you a number of how many Canadians that exist, it's about like 38 million. 38 million. So anyways, speaking about the food supply chain, there are really three main stages of the food supply chain, which is that primary production, which we spoke about, the farming aspect of it, and then this idea of mechanization, so processing and manufacturing of the final product, and then distribution, so getting it place to place. With food insecurity, the primary reason why it still exists today is not necessarily because of this farming, because we have a surplus, or the way it's processed, but it's actually distribution and the cost of distribution. So this can this could be because of like social problems. We just spoke a little bit about this. It could be from war or poverty, like not having enough money, so societal pressures and societal constructs that exist to enforce these barriers for distribution. And like even stuff like having an unnecessary percentage of farmland that is not actually devoted to any food grown for human consumption, and the global food system, which allows a significant amount of waste in processing and packaging. So we also spoke about that a little bit earlier. So thinking about that, like you might think, okay, well, we have this problem with distribution. Can we not localize food to help improve food security? Well, if you think about what does local mean, it actually means very different things to very different regions and very different people, right? So in Canada, like we used to define local as 50 kilometers from the point of origin. So for example, if you're in Toronto, then everything within the region of Toronto would be considered local. Recently, that definition actually changed. So now it's no longer 50 kilometers within the point of region, it's 50 kilometers within the province of the point of origin. So for example, if you are eating something from Hudson's Bay, like Northern Ontario, or 50 kilometers outside of Ontario from Quebec, it's still considered local. So if you think about that distribution, like think about having to drive potentially 8-9 hours for some food, from point to point, and like the cost of gas, having to preserve it, manage the food waste that could potentially come out of that. So that construct of local hasn't really been, it's kind of green marketed. It's marketed to help make you feel that it's actually improving food security, but it potentially might not actually be that because the distribution is still pretty far.
I think one term that's come out of this, instead of saying local, we'll say 100-mile diet or something like that.
Okay, so oh, please tag us as well.
Yeah, please tag us. We'll reshare as well on Instagram.
Ours is, I'm just sharing our IG handle. Okay, so actually these numbers are quite higher than the actual amount of people, thankfully.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, thankful for that. It's 8%. So 8% of people living in Canada experience food insecurity. So just food for thought, like when you're reading something, take a critical thinking mindset towards what you're reading. Like, does local actually mean local based off what you've defined as local versus like the manufacturer who represents local? So just moving to the next slide. So let's look at food security across Canada. When we look at this graph of like Canada, when we look at this like this map of Canada, what we want to notice here is that the northern regions are facing much more insecurity than the southern regions. Again, going back to those definitions, like moderately food insecure is a compromise in the quality and the quantity of food consumed. So going back to that thought of, okay, well, I have $5 to feed me. I can either buy a handful of vegetables or I could buy like a full meal. Like, what would I do there? Which do I think I need? And a severe is like a reduced food intake and disrupted eating patterns. So that's maybe you have to skip breakfast and dinner and you can really only eat lunch daily. So within Canada, like communities in the north disproportionately experience food insecurity due to the poorly connected infrastructure. Some communities are not accessible by road, or they require food to be transported by air. Transporting food by air is significantly more expensive, which inflates prices of food for remote northern communities. Which, like, if you think about it, like think about how much gas you need and also structure to handle harsh climates that exist in the north. So now we're gonna move into this concept of food landscapes, just slightly mentioned earlier. What you're looking at is a map of Toronto. And what we're trying to define within this map are food deserts, which is really like in this map, it shows areas of low incomes in the red boundaries. So if you can see up here on the top of the map, there's a couple of red boundaries, which identify low income. And then you can see the areas that are highlighted in blue, which is modified retail environmental index. It calculates like the ratio of healthier to less healthy food store locations within a kilometer walking distance. So how scattered are retailers that provide food at an affordable cost? It shows that there are a higher number of lower income households and food environments which within these areas, which they have to choose between you know, like, I guess buying stuff
that's unhealthy.
Yeah, because it's just not accessible or affordable. So looking at that, let's talk a bit about food deserts, food swamps, and food mirage. So food deserts, the term is really typically described as like the neighborhood that lacks full service grocery stores, but then often refers to a built environment that is generally sparse in fresh food options. So like you live in an area that only has McDonald's, and the grocery store is actually a 30-minute drive away. You're more likely to eat at McDonald's and probably go get your groceries from the grocery store that's 30 minutes away.
Another example of a food desert could be where you have these options to eat, but because of the way you work, maybe you're working a night shift, you won't be able to go to these grocery stores because it's not within your hours.
Yeah, so what is available in the middle of the night, or your option is maybe a convenience store and they don't have a lot of food available within the convenience store. Food swamps, this is like over allocation of unhealthy food in a neighborhood, going back to that example of having a lot of McDonald's in one neighborhood, but then your grocery store is just really far away, so you don't have access to it or easy access to it. And then food mirage. So when healthy food options are present, but it's just not affordable or otherwise just out of reach of like low income residences, which is kind of what we see in the map to the right of Toronto, where, you know, maybe potentially there are grocery stores available, but it's just not affordable to a lot of low income residences. Okay, so going into our next discussion, we're going to split into breakout rooms again, but this time we're going to capture your brainstorm on Slido. So what you need to do here is on a tab on your computer, just log into Slido and then enter my voice. And the question that you're going to be prompted with is what are characteristics of an equitable and functional food system? We'll give everyone 5 minutes to discuss and write things. So it'll be pretty rapid. And then 5 minutes after we'll talk as a group.
We'll just create a brainstorm basically is what we're doing.
And it'll just be a quick brainstorm. Nargis, do you mind prompting the breakout rooms again?
Yep.
Did everyone get the Slido link?
Slido.go or go. Okay, starting up again. Seth, you're still hanging in there. You're not joining any of them, or? Okay, he's gone now. So how does Slido work? Is it to just
Recognize that we still face food insecurity. How are we trying to improve food security systems today for food security?
So as mentioned, like our short-sighted goal to improve efficiency is significantly depleted and compromised our resources. So our water, our land, like in deforestation. One major key resource that we have depleted is also soil. So in order to succeed in food security, our goal is to strive for a balance between the resources we have on Earth that we're limited with, and also having an economic model that we have created for ourselves. So as you can see, like the dirt beneath our feet, it's getting poorer and poorer in quality across the world. It's becoming more challenging to grow the same quality of food that we once were able to over time. And this is going to be an issue, and this is kind of why we have the issue of deforestation. As people find their land is less productive, they'll go and encroach on forested areas. So just wanted to share some quick facts about soil. So as mentioned, we have several non-renewable resources, which are land and fertile soil. So each year, an estimated 24 billion tons of fertile soil are lost due to erosion. So that's almost 3.4 tons lost every year for each person on the planet. So the productivity of some of our lands has declined to a point of 50% due to soil erosion and desertification. So with the current high erosion rates throughout the world, it's a really big concern for this because we can't renew this topsoil as quickly. So to give us this productive topsoil, it takes approximately 500 years for creating just 2.5 centimeters of fertile ground that's used for agricultural conditions. On a global scale, around 10 to 20% of dry lands, 24% of the world's productive lands are very degraded. So as people are looking to farm on more productive land, this again leads to more deforestation. So at a recent conference, the UN shared this statistic of 60 years is what we have as a cutoff. And again, we want to always tell you to look at these headlines with a grain of salt. Like, think about it critically. We're not going to run out of soil, but it means that we need to replenish it or find ways to alter our practices to meet our needs. So with that being said, one of the approaches to solve this is through regenerative agriculture. So regeneration, again, we're talking about replenishing or reviving. So regenerative agriculture is a system of farming principles and practices that are looking to rehabilitate the health of our soil, as well as the soil biome. So things that are living in there, all of those little bugs that we find creepy are actually very important for the health of plants and ultimately ourselves. And how can we do so in a way that minimizes our fertilizer use? And really, we want to replenish or improve the resources we have rather than depleting them. So I'm just going to share some examples of regenerative agricultural practices for you guys to keep in mind. One of them is conservation tillage. So tillage is when you go into a garden and you plow the land and you turn over the soil. What that does is it exposes it to the air and it dries out the soil, and it actually releases a lot of carbon dioxide. If we're shifting to a no-till system, you can harness more and it will capture more of the carbon dioxide. It results in having a healthier soil microbiome, and it disturbs the soil less for runoff as well. So there's less soil erosion. When the soil is loose and dried up, it washes away much more quickly. So overall, that creates a more healthier soil organic matter for us to be able to thrive. Another aspect that we have is crop diversity. So we mentioned monoculture earlier. Why soil tilled? Soil tilling has been a very quick and dirty way for farmers to kind of turn over their land when you have weeds. You want to kind of just, by tilling it, you're kind of uprooting all of the weeds, you're breaking up the hard soil. Like if there's a lot of clay, you'll till it to break it up. It serves a lot of very quick ways to prepare the land for farming. However, it also disturbs the soil as well.
Like what you want to think about is like when you put a plant into the ground, it sets roots, it sets like a lot of micronutrients and bacteria in the land itself. So when you go and the next year you want to plant a new plant in that same spot, it's really difficult to understand what's happening in that specific soil. Turning it around will help it reduce the risk of it having either cross germination or potentially not having access to that nutrients that existed in the soil from the year before. And so tillage is a really quick way to just get access to that.
Mm-hmm. There's one more question. So the alternative to tilling is conservation tillage. So with that, you are kind of picking areas of the land that you don't till, and you kind of just seed on top of it. You don't have to necessarily till the whole land. You can also just till in between your rows of crops so that overall the soil has a bit of a bank and it doesn't flow off as quickly. There's a lot of different ways. Basically you can either do no tillage and you can do conservation tillage, which is basically it's half the amount of tilling as you would normally do conventionally.
Just a quick question. The land that you guys went to see and it was tilled, was it conservationally tilled? The one
No, conservation till, it's very deep. You almost you can see the rows. It's a little deeper.
Yeah, and then I guess other ways you can get around tillage is crop rotation, cover cropping, which is kind of, you have companion plants that you can put in between your crops that feed nutrients, and then combining with livestock. So actually having chickens on your field,
yeah,
amazing. They're cute. They have little babies, they can have eggs, and they help your field.
So with cover cropping, what you're doing is you're not growing something the same level. You'll pick something that's short, maybe a grass or alfalfa, and then you'll have your taller wheat. It's not going to compete with your wheat for light, and it just covers that soil so it's not exposed to the air, and it's lower to the ground, and it can also be used as a way to add nitrogen, because every plant puts something back into the soil that something else will take out. And then again, the pro of livestock is while they're out there playing around in the field or just scratching around for food, if they're chickens, they might be eating pests, and B, while they're roaming the fields, they're also going to be naturally depositing manure for free. So
yeah, and manure itself is a super expensive industry. So if you're ever considering a field and you're not afraid of like manure, then like that could be a potential area to invest in. Like another thing is, like you could use dead wood. A lot of people use piles and piles of dead wood for that nitrogen.
as it decomposes.
Yeah, as it decomposes, they'll put piles of hay and dead wood around their land to help with for like adding nutrients back into the soil.
The reason we have crop diversity also is because with monoculture, if you have disease, if you think about it, you have two things that are growing next to each other that have the same exact pests and things like that. It can spread very quickly. Whereas if you have crop diversity, it can kind of create a barrier or a break, and it prevents a full-on loss of crop, like something that might decimate a whole field. Now, at least you've guaranteed 50% of your field to have a different response.
You can kind of think about it as like you go to a kindergarten class and one kid has a runny nose, and then the next day everybody has a runny nose.
Yeah, crop diversity is the face mask of the agricultural world. So basically with regenerative agriculture, we're kind of taking a look at closing our loop and creating a circular agricultural model. It doesn't mean that we're going back to like rural 1900s style like homestead farming. That's an unrealistic model. Agriculture actually struggled a lot due to illness and fertilizer use and very little fertilizer use. And also there was risks of bad harvest. All we're doing in a circular agriculture is we're keeping the residuals of agricultural biomass and food processing within the food system. So any of those leaks that we talked about earlier, we want to minimize those leaks and kind of re-put them in. So if there's crops that are left over, can we leave them in the soil so that they can turn into compost? If there's cattle grazing nearby, instead of having the feedstock grown like miles and miles away, can we put those fields of cattle nearby those feedstocks, and then can we use the manure that's coming from these cattle to replenish the soil and build up our soil health?
One of the questions I want to pose to the group, and feel free to put this in the chat, but can you think of waste products from one industry that can feed into another industry? So I guess like what would be quote unquote gold from waste product that could feed into another industry?
So again, I just want to emphasize we are always going to we're going to have an interdependency. We've come so far with like the way globalization is. We are going to have different regions. Like we support none of it, but just keeping in mind of these practices. Let's see what people have said in the chats.
Exactly, yeah. So like using, for example, when you have an apple and if you're finished eating it, that core can be used for compost, that could be used for fertilizing your land.
A lot of people used to do, for example, they'd have backyard chickens, and whatever you're composting would actually go to feed those chickens, and then you're getting eggs in return, for example. Biofuel is a really good example.
Yeah, that's an amazing example. Actually, in your kits today, the product that we use for the soil is a waste product from another industry. It's called coconut core, and essentially it's the husk of the coconut, which is actually great for
water retention.
Yeah, for water retention. It's sterile, it's organic, and it's really great for growing, especially microgreens.
Michelle, you raised your hand. Do you wanna unmute and share your question?
Actually, no, I just want to add it to your point. I mean, you guys mentioned like what industry can feed into like another industry, and like for example, health, like with agriculture and stuff. That reminds me of like what's going on in Guelph at the moment. Like they're trying to make a circular food economy there, where they have where like different, like for example, like they'll take some like waste from a brewery and then reuse that somewhere else to make use of it. And I thought it was really cool. So I'm going to put a link to that, what they're doing there, because I thought it was really amazing.
Yeah. Yes, do it.
So you guys can check it out.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
So our next slide is When we were talking about all of these leakages and we were talking about transparency and being able to see how our food is actually produced, one approach to also do this is through urban farming. And there's many like pros for doing this. One of them is the cost of it. So the average urban garden for home use, so think of a backyard or a community garden plot, you can actually produce $250 to around $500 worth of food, depending on your skill level and what you plant for yourself to consume. If you have mastered it, you might be able to plant certain vegetables and have a succession of harvests throughout the season. So things like tomatoes, peppers, these things, once you pluck them off the plant, they're going to flower again, and you can keep harvesting until pretty much from May, June to October kind of. Another thing that we mentioned earlier is because there's so much wastage in our food supply chain, 20% of fresh food processed in Canada is wasted because of the spoilage and infestation, even just the way it gets packaged. By the time it reaches us, at least like 20 to 13% of the fruits and vegetables are discarded or not used. And if we're growing closer to the supply, if we're living closer to our supply, we can reduce those food losses and shorten our supply chain.
Another really cool thing about thinking about tech for good, like technology for good, is that a lot of companies, like large manufacturing companies, even small farms, like they're taking a lot of notice in what inventions have been created today to help them reduce something like this, like putting in sensors on the field, finding ways to use cameras to monitor how much is their production really, and do they really need to produce that much? Another one is monitoring diseases. Do you guys know what Internet of Things is? Essentially a way to connect like hardware to software to be able to monitor something. So kind of like having a baby monitor that can recognize like when a disease is about to spread or is starting to spread within a field or within a inventory of, like, for example, potatoes.
It kind of goes back to your point earlier, and you guys asked the question, is industrialization bad? And no, like these types of mechanizations are actually helpful. So quickly, just want to run through some forms of urban agriculture that you might see in your homes or also in your communities. So one is a backyard garden. So you can have a small area dedicated near your back wall or to the side that's sunny. You can start producing your own vegetables. If you are not privileged to have a backyard, there's ways that you can grow. There's community gardens in each society. Usually you have to access a waiting list, but you'll get like a small 10 by 20. It's a really great way to connect with your neighbors and learn from each other. Another way of gardening in urban areas, people will take smaller plots of land around 1 to 2 acres in size and create a market garden. So basically they're creating a place where they grow a variety of vegetables, and then people are invited to come to these urban gardens and buy their produce right away from there. There's a model here called community supported agriculture. It's almost like, have you heard of subscription boxes for like food or anything like that? Basically at the start of the year, you say, I want to guarantee my supply of fresh vegetables for like the summer months. And this gives the farmer like a bit of added reassurance because there's a lot of upfront costs. It allows them to forecast better. And then as they're harvesting every week, you get a guaranteed supply of fresh seasonal vegetables. Another way that's kind of cool and is coming up very often is guerrilla gardening, particularly in Europe. A lot of these dead spaces, like around trees or even like near traffic lights or even your front lawn, people are turning those into productive food places. And also there's even sometimes maps where you can see local trees that are on like public property that provide fruit. So like oranges, or in our area, we have a lot of berries and stuff like that, service berries in Kitchener.
I'll share a link to this later, but there's essentially a organization called Fallen Fruit, and essentially they've tried to map out different fruit trees and edible plants around Ontario, so, or even actually across Canada. So if you are wondering what could you potentially find in your area that's edible, you can leverage this app to kind of either go do some geotagging and see where it is and try and cultivate something, or also just learn more about local produce that exists in the natural habitat.
Another way that we're seeing in urban centers where there's maybe not a lot of flat land is rooftop gardening. So similar to green roofs. This is actually a picture from Ryerson, so very close to us. They have a full-fledged rooftop garden that they've had for a few years now, and it's very successful. It also has the added benefit of providing cooling to the building underneath, so it's energy efficient. Other ways, if you want to, obviously we're in Canada, so we can't grow year round unless you have a greenhouse. And sometimes it makes more economic sense to have a greenhouse in an urban area because the land value, you want to be able to use it year round. And then you're also able to provide for your customers year round. Another very exciting thing is hydroponics. I hope you guys are excited about this. This is a bit of foreshadowing to our next class. We're gonna just very, very basic intro to hydroponics. It's how to grow without soil altogether. So you would grow in a system of water ducts and you would add nutrients or like worm compost tea into it as a thing, and you can grow vertically in this way. So we have some vertical towers as well as some pipes as well as these rotating things. So you can basically rotate the rows of vegetables so that they get a constant supply of light every day. And one that we're working on very closely is a controlled environment. We're looking at small containers like a shipping container. What we've done is we've insulated the exterior and we've insulated the inside, and we're going to add artificial lighting, and we'll be able to control like the humidity, the amount of carbon dioxide, water, everything, to be able to grow an experiment of food within this year round.
So last discussion before we take a bit of a break. I'm sure like you're probably overwhelmed with the amount of information. Quickly, we're gonna jump back into Slido, and we're gonna just do a quick poll. Let me see if you can see my screen. This is, okay, so can everyone go onto Slido, back into Slido and start my voice? Perfect. And if there's one that we haven't mentioned, feel free to call it out.
Yeah, like you can unmute and say what those ideas are.
Wow, there's a lot of favor for backyard and community gardens.
I feel like it's the easiest step to start.
Anyone want to mention one that we might not have on this list right now?
So what was guerrilla gardening again?
Guerrilla gardening is kind of taking lots of land that are not specifically designated for growing, or they might just be useless. Like for example, near a stoplight, if there's a little green patch, you can put some kind of plants there, or even on your, you know how you have a sidewalk in front of your house and then the patch in front of your home?
Mm-hmm.
You can turn that into a publicly accessible food area.
Sometimes like near, for example, a playground, there's like vast pieces of land that's just completely untouched. Like you can repurpose a bit of that.
How about permissions? Like, are you allowed to do that? Or you get permits?
A lot of cities are now promoting this. There's like community groups that will allow you to do that. There's also food foraging, which is a form of guerrilla gardening. A lot of the times you'll see wild food, like this year, there's a lot of garlic mustard. If you have any trails near your home, chances are it's growing as a weed, but it's actually edible and you can use it for eating or supplementing your diet.
Another one that's super common in southwestern Ontario is sumac. Sumac is like everywhere. It's a spice that is used in Middle Eastern cuisine. Which one of these would include growing a variety of foods in your home? I don't know.
Any of these, actually.
Yeah, any of these could do that. container gardening. So that's something that I practice within my home, where I live in an apartment, like I have a condo, and I've built like a container garden on my terrace that's been able to feed more than 3 or 4 people per serving for many, many weeks up until most recently.
When you say container gardening on a terrace, what is a container made of? When I think of containers, I think of shipping containers.
So we've made it out of cedar. Like I've made a cedar container, and it's self-watering. It has like a water reserve underneath the cedar, and then it's coated in a almost like a sheet that's waterproof, and then on top of that has like different forms of soil, and then within that, like I've just planted different kind of plants to see how well they'll grow next to each other. So we've had Brussels sprouts, we've had kale, like 10 different types of tomatoes, zucchini, butternut squash, and this is a small container. It's not very big, but it's managed to grow so much. Cabbage, I'm trying to think of what else, okra,
Swiss chard.
Swiss chard.
Lots of Swiss chard.
Lots of Swiss chard. Yeah, it's been very fruitful over the summer and up until November.
I was just thinking back to Javeria's point, there is one restriction. So for hydroponic, because you're dealing with putting the root system in water, typically it's not a system that's very successful with root growing vegetables like carrots or beets and stuff like that. Then you're kind of looking at leafy greens and tomatoes. Anything that grows well above the ground is going to grow well in hydroponic. But if it's a root-based plant like potato, you're not going to grow it in hydroponic.
And you have to think about other things with hydroponic, like space constraint. Like if you don't have a lot of space, you might not grow a big plant. The other thing you might want to think about is how much nutrients do you need to supplement for missing soil, right? Like if you don't have soil and you have to supplement with some sort of other nutrients, like how much of that do you really need?
Awesome. So it seems like backyard community gardens are the clear winner. And how did we get our container? We partnered with a local nonprofit, and the container was donated to us, and we're...
Oh wait, which container? So the wooden one we built.
Oh, yes.
Like I just went to Home Depot and bought a bunch of cedar and built it. And the shipping container that we repurposed to a controlled environment, we were fortunate enough to get that donated to us for experimentation for a community project.
Divya, the container you're calling a container is like the wooden planter.
Yes, yeah. So we have 2 containers. One is a shipping container, and the other one's the cedar wooden container. Okay, so just because we don't have too much time left, and I think everyone deserves a bit of a break, we're just gonna do a 10-minute, actually 5-minute break. I don't think we
Just share what you need to have when you come back.
We're just gonna quickly share.
Oh, that one.
And then,
so everyone should have water, your seeds that you soaked. If you didn't soak your pea seeds, that's fine. Just grab your arugula seeds that can do without water. You'll need your coconut coir, paper towel. You may need scissors. Actually, just grab scissors if you can.
or an X-Acto knife.
Yeah. And then you'll need 2 containers for soil and 1 container for paper towel. If you don't have that amount, it's fine. Just bring what you have and we'll go through the process, but this is what you'll need. We'll leave this up here and for a minute, and then we'll meet back in 10 minutes.
Do you think 20 minutes is enough time?
I think everybody should be ready with their stuff.
Are you all ready with your stuff?
Are you not ready?
Maybe we'll give everyone a 5-minute bio break and then get started.
Does anyone, need
We
a
still have the
bathroom?
Kahoot in the end, so would we be done by 1:30?
We might be tight.
Yeah, okay. How about a 3-minute bio break? I just feel like people need to get up and stretch. And then we should be good by 1:30.
I think so. We'll rush.
So we'll give everyone 3 minutes, and we're counting. So 3 minutes, 1:03. Go to the washroom, stretch, and we'll be back shortly.
We need to just rearrange our table too.
Welcome back. It's 1:03, so let's get started.
We've been doing a lot of talking, but now we'll actually get to the hands-on part and you'll get to participate and get your hands dirty. Excited for this part.
So we're just gonna assume that everyone has their supplies, going back, water, scissors or X-Acto knife, seeds, the growing medium, which is coconut coir. I did see that question in the chat. Paper towels, container, an open container, and as well a container with a lid. So to start, what are microgreens? So we're gonna just do, like the workshop that we're hosting right now will just be an introductory one to container gardening. We're gonna talk a bit about these microgreens. Really, like there's like 4 stages of like a plant life. There's a sprout, there's the microgreen, there's a baby green, and an adult green. And a microgreen is just a subcomponent of like the greater plant life cycle. Oh, ew. How do I do that? Is it this one?
Mm-hmm.
Is it working? Okay, sorry. Okay, let's see if I can play the thing.
Is it looking fine for everyone now? You're seeing like the main presentation. Yeah.
Can this play from here?
Sure.
Oh.
Yeah, okay, so as you can see here, it's basically showing you a quick run through of what the life cycle is up to the point of microgreen. It starts as a sprout and then it gets its first 2 baby leaves. These are not true leaves, these are just the first leaves that give the plant energy while it's seeking light. And at this stage, it's a very young plant. So the reason why we're wanting to grow microgreens is because you can grow them indoor. We talked about how in Canada, we're very limited by our growing season to just the summer. But there are ways to grow inside during year round. And this is a very low, get your feet wet, like easy, approachable way to start growing. And we hope this is a jumping off point for you to the summer where you can actually grow a backyard garden.
So the best thing about microgreens is like overnight, you're gonna see growth. When you look at this, like this is day 1, day 2, like you'll see it grow super quickly.
It's ready to eat in 8 days.
Exactly. So why microgreens? Microgreens actually encompass like a variety of diverse vegetables and as well nutrition profiles. Most commonly, like they can come from leafy greens or herbs, like you'll see kale microgreen, arugula, beet greens, onions, radish, watercress, chard, bok choy, cilantro, basil. There's a lot. One thing to note is that the vitamin and mineral profile will be similar to that of the larger plant, but much more concentrated. So between eating a large plant or a microgreen, there really isn't a difference when it comes to nutrients, or like scientifically, they haven't been able to figure out if one is better than the other. Like I think at the end of the day, just eat your vegetables. Leafy greens are a really good source in general for beta carotene as well as iron and calcium. Dark leafy greens such as kale or Swiss chard, they're high in lutein, and which actually just keep your eyes really healthy. So eat your dark leafy greens or eat your microgreens. Flavor profiles of the microgreens actually tend to vary. You'll find some are like very sharp and kind of taste like mustard. Others are they taste buttery. Like we've heard that they could taste buttery or sweet.
Each one of them's quite like a powerful punch of flavor.
Yeah, the flavor profile is super concentrated because the edible leaves are harvested in that early growth stage. And so before that like root and leaf structure is formed, like everything is literally in that tiny plant. So you might ask, like, how does the microgreen nutrients compare to sprouts or the mature vegetables? If grown in soil, microgreens absorb minerals from the soil as they grow. They also undergo like more photosynthesis than the sprout. So looking at that plant life cycle, going from that sprout to the microgreen, which actually helps them develop more nutrients and as well increase fiber content. So actually really rich in fiber. really rich in vitamins, just overall really good for you and really interesting in terms of taste. Compared to the full-size plant, high concentration of nutrients like vitamins and minerals obviously means that you'll be packing more into each bite. However, the microgreens have not been proven to definitely be healthier than the larger plant. So like I stated earlier, doesn't matter if you're eating something small or big. For vegetables, just eat your vegetables. And while there has been research comparing it, I'm trying to think. At the end of the day, really, yeah, like just eat your greens.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna get nutrients regardless. So before we get started, I want to make sure, has everyone washed their hands and their growing containers? You want to make sure your container is clean. You can wash it in like a light bleach solution or in warm water. And you want to observe for mold and wilting over the period of time. Rinse thoroughly for the harvest. So when you're growing the greens, don't wash them. Like wash it once you're harvesting to eat. And then you can store into the fridge for up to 3 days. So once you've harvested it, you can store it into the fridge. And then once you're about to eat, you should wash it. Otherwise it might wilt or expose a lot of bacteria.
Does everybody know what harvesting means? Just want to make sure that what they mean, they know what that means. You might just explain it, Anam, just in case.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Harvesting just means basically after it's grown to the point you want to eat it. Harvest just means taking it off of the soil and having it ready to eat.
Yeah, like almost like just cutting these plants that we have in front of us, that would be considered a harvest. But we'll actually go into that into detail later as well. So each seed has its own soak time, germination time, harvest time, and sometimes special instructions. The idea behind the soak time, it's that for seeds that are much bigger, for example, like our pea seeds over here, they need more time to be exposed to water, which helps them with germination, versus like something super small like arugula, where the seed's so small that it can turn into jelly.
It'll actually drown if you soak it in water, so you don't want it to, like, the seed is living and breathing as well, right? Like it needs oxygen, so you wouldn't. And then just to recap on what germination is, germination means the time that it takes a seed to go from its sedentary form into like living and absorbing water so it'll sprout basically.
And you'll see that for the bigger seeds, it might take a little bit longer to germinate versus the smaller seeds, it might be much more quicker. But then the other thing you want to know is the harvest time. So similar to like how big a seed might be, it might take longer to harvest. And another thing is to keep in mind for special instructions. So seeds need a blackout period sometimes. And what that means is that they need a period of time where they can't be exposed to sunlight, and it just helps with the growing, but also changes the flavor profile. Yeah, that's fine.
All of them, some of them, so what it might affect is if you soaked all of them, they might have, because I mentioned like the seed needs oxygen, the ones that were soaked for more hours, they might have a lower germination rate. So rather than all of your seeds sprouting, you might only have a few that grow into a plant. And that may just mean that like you won't have as much of a harvest to go with. So it's very important to keep an eye on each individual seed soak time. So like for example, mustard, you don't want to keep it in water longer than 4 hours. That's like the upper limit. But give it a go, see how it goes. Like if you did soak them, what does germination look like? If we scroll back to the video, it's
when the seed starts forming sprouts. So
day 1 or 2.
Yeah, like when you see that roots start penetrating the seed itself, that's the germination. The other thing you want to keep in mind is if you want to check to see if your seeds are germinating, just put a little bit of water in the cup, and the seeds that are floating, take them out because they're probably germination time, like might be not as good.
Can we put different types of seeds in the same container? No, I would advise against that because, for example, each type of plant has different speeds of growing and different environments that they like. For example, radish grows very quickly. It's one of the fastest growing ones. And it needs to be blacked out for a very little time compared to something like peas, which takes longer to grow. It's going to want to have a separate condition. So to keep everything optimized, you would prefer to have them separated. However, if you want to experiment with that, I would say like pick 2 seeds when you look at this chart that have similar growing conditions, similar growing speeds, and you can put
similar
those,
sizes too.
Yeah.
Like make sure they're the same size, because these pea shoots will definitely overcrowd like the cabbage over there.
like you could grow, I have cabbage here and mustard, you could potentially grow these 2 next to each other. I personally wouldn't advise it, but it's always a fun experiment and I'm going to encourage that.
And I think you have enough seeds to be able to try that experiment on top of just growing them separately to see what happens. And if you do it, let us know, send us an email or send us an image of what's happening.
Yeah.
Do we need to water the soil
Yeah,
first?
we'll go into that.
Yeah, we'll walk through that on the hands-on portion. So we're gonna go through the 2 methods, paper towel and soil. One is it'll use capillary action to pull water from the paper towel and help grow the actual microgreen. And you'll see that you don't actually need soil to grow a microgreen, but the composition will look completely different than if it is growing in soil. And then the second method is in soil.
We'll go through these 2 options. We want to give you an overview, and we want to hear in our next call, like in January, what your experiences were with both of them. We have some assumptions, but we want to hear what your feedback is on which method you prefer. So with all of these that we're growing, we want to basically optimize for germination and plant growth. The 3 key things that your seeds will need are adequate supply of water. So you want to make sure it doesn't get too dry or too wet. Just like as long as you can see that the soil looks, if you touch it, it shouldn't be like oozing out and making your hand wet, but it should be moist enough that it's not dry and flaky. You want to make sure it's a warm temperature. So think about it, seeds usually grow in warmer climates during the spring and fall. So keep this plant growing in an area for your home that is relatively warm. Usually a kitchen is a good spot to target. Another thing to consider is lighting. So because we are growing inside, we're not getting the full power of sunlight. You can put your plants as close to the window as possible. But also I've had luck with putting it under a desk light or something like that if it needs a little extra boost. And you'll notice if it needs more light because the plants will start like seeking out light. They'll kind of grow in the direction of light.
Because the growth rate is so quick, it's really easy to tell what the plant needs, because you'll see, like if it starts to wilt, it probably needs water. If it needs sun, it'll start reaching for sunlight. And so you can readjust where the plant is. They're pretty forgiving in that sense. Something to just keep in mind.
And exactly what we're going to show you is we're going to show you how to grow stuff in the soil. We'll start with peas and arugula. Know that it's okay to fail. That's the reason why we gave you extra seeds. We want you to experiment and find conditions that work well. If something doesn't grow well, for example, your peas might not do well, but maybe your arugula will grow really well. Capture those notes and I'll just kick into showing you how it works.
Do desk lights provide the same energy as sunlight for the plants? No, so sunlight will never be comparable to any form of like artificial light, but I think you're growing a small plant that sometimes just needs an extra boost. Like you could try and supplement with some form of desk light or LED light.
So with that, I'm going to switch to the top-down camera view, and I'm going to start with showing you how to grow in water. We're going to begin with arugula. So what I'll do in each process is I'll do a quick rundown of the process quickly so you have an overview, and then I'll do a second pass with all of you guys following along in that second round. Okay, so first I'm just going to demo what we have here so you know the overall concept. So our goal with this one is we're growing in a water solution, water-based container. We're using a paper towel, and eventually you'll have something that looks like this. Okay, so I have a recycled takeout container. It's something that's a little deep so I can fill water into it, and I have a flat lid. We need the flat lid because that's where our plant's gonna grow. What I've done is I've made 2 slits on the side. Now, if you haven't got a scissor, you can also just try seeing if the paper towel will reach around to the bottom so that it can still dip in water. But essentially, what we're aiming to do is we're looking to build a capillary action by creating a wick. So I have the top side of my lid, which is going to be the side where the plants will be growing. And I have the bottom side here, where I've passed the little wing of paper towel into.
For those that are doing this at home, try and use an X-Acto knife if you have one. And if you're nervous, maybe you can ask your parent or guardian to help support
the cutting of it.
Yeah, the cutting of the lid, but essentially you just want to make 2 small slits on the lid.
So what you have now is you have a flat surface on the top. This is the side up side where it's flat, and we're going to be growing our leaves. And on the bottom side, you've got these 2 wings. This bottom side is what's going to go into the container with water. So I'll just fill that with water now, and it should start soaking up the water.
And this happens really quickly.
So again, flat side up. I'm just going to then take a second piece of paper towel, and we're creating an area for the greens to grow on top of. So having as big a paper towel as possible means that you maximize your surface area. So anywhere on this paper towel is where the seeds are going to grow. Honestly, I'm just adding water to speed the process along, but you shouldn't need to do this necessarily.
Do you guys understand what capillary action is? It's just a way of building a system, kind of like putting a rope in water, and you can see the rope at the top becoming wet because the rope is actually pulling up the water. So similar, that's what's happening here. The 2 pieces of paper towel on the edges are pulling the water up to the top of the surface to keep it moist. And then the paper towel that's laid out flat on top is just increasing the surface area.
Yeah, because it's touching that other piece of paper, it's also then joining and expanding that capillary action. So now you see here, this is in place of our growing medium. So think about it this way. Usually seeds need a bit of depth of soil to be able to grow and latch on their roots. This is the reason why I pick this process for something that's a smaller seed. For example, arugula is a great one. Mustard is a smaller size seed. I've even had luck with radish, but something like peas, you can experiment and see, does it grow well, or does pea need more surface area or depth to grow in soil? So once you have this stage done, all you're going to do is sprinkle your seeds on top. If you have soaked seeds, you're going to do the exact same process. You're going to put the soaked seeds on top here. But you just want to cover an even spread and leave a bit of gap for airflow between the plants, and so that they don't crowd out too much. So I would say, if you guys can see the screen, I'll bring this a little closer, something kind of like that is what your end result should be. Okay, so now that I've done one pass of this, we're going to switch to gallery view so we can see what everyone is doing, and we'll walk you through the process so that you can follow along.
Does everyone have their supplies out and ready for the paper towel method?
And are there any questions right off the top that I can address? Did I forget to cover something?
Do you want to turn on your cameras? Perfect.
Well, there's a huge crack that I made in my little lid.
That's perfect. A crack is great.
Yeah.
Really? It looks terrible.
Honestly, you should have seen mine. Like, mine pretty much broke, and it's still gonna do a great job. It's a really good way to reuse stuff that's not got a purpose anymore in terms of food saving.
Perfect. Okay, so then I guess, does anyone have any questions?
So,
Can we spotlight ourselves?
so if you want to look at this one, this is a top, and the bottom has that much hanging out, like hanging down.
As long as it reaches the water, that is perfect.
Yeah.
Like the water in your container that you're trying to.
You need the container because you need a reserve for the water.
Yeah, so here's the
If we decide not to like cut a hole in our container lid, could we do something, I don't know, like this? How do we?
Yeah, you can tuck it under the sides as long as it's reaching the water below. That's perfectly fine. So I can show you something similar that I'm doing on my second container.
And then a second paper towel on top, right? You said?
Yeah, so that's just to increase the surface area so you can grow more in that space.
So I'm filling mine with water, and then this time, instead of cutting the lid, I'm just gonna tuck the edges of the paper towel over.
Are you noticing that the paper towel is becoming damp on top?
How many seeds should we sprinkle on top?
Just eyeball it. In this case, if you're using arugula, because it didn't need to be soaked, I would eyeball it, kind of see an even dispersion. Here, I don't know if we can spotlight this camera again. Something kind of like this would be a good starting point.
We're not putting any water on top of the top paper towel, right?
You can. I just did that to speed it up, but you don't have to do that.
Yeah, like if you're noticing that your paper towel on top is still fairly dry, it just helps keep the seeds sticky.
Mm-hmm.
And then also helps pull the water up from the bottom.
The thing is, once you're done with this, it's kind of a hands-off process. You shouldn't need to water it ever, because it'll just continuously get water from the reservoir as long as there is water in there left over.
Yeah.
So like someone was mentioning, this time I just tucked the edge of the paper towels down into my container, and it's already wicking up water. And
that's a better method, I think.
It's very easy. It's just sometimes a container is too wide, so it won't reach. But so in that case, we recommend you cut it. But if you don't need to, you don't have to. And it's much easier. You can just like lift it up to check the water levels that way too. It's all, honestly, we're just giving you guidelines, and tell us what works for you, what like little hacks you come up with for making the process easier for yourself. It's not a hard and fast rule.
I realize we only have 5 minutes left.
Okay. Does anyone have a hard stop? If you have a hard stop, I'm gonna...
Yeah, let's do a rush through. Some people might, so let's just do a rush through.
Where does the second paper towel go? Right on top of the first in perpendicular. Mm-hmm. So if you can see our container, yep, there you go. Like you can see that second one was just laid right on top. No problem. Okay, so we'll just quickly switch to the soil method. We'll do once over, and then we'll help with support everyone else.
So I just have my soil. This time I am going to take a jug of water and hydrate the coconut core.
Your coconut core will expand 5 to 8 times the amount that you're seeing. So just do this in small portions, like
small batches.
Yeah, if you do a little batch at a time and you realize it's still super, super wet, then
but you want it to kind of not be soupy, I just eyeball it every time.
Like maybe just put like a third of a cup, and then just put a small piece, like maybe a third of like what you have, and then add another third cup, and then you'll see it start to break apart and expand.
Spoon or something I can use.
Yeah.
I have a good question about the storage of the coconut flour or whatever. Does it have to be like how do I store it afterwards? Like, is it fine if I just leave it open?
So after you plant your seeds, you can store it with like a little lid on top, because you know how normally you plant a seed under the ground. In this situation, we're putting the seed above the soil. A, because it's less messy. As the seed comes up out of the ground, it'll like push the soil up with it, so it's going to create a lot of mess. So in this case, you're going to put either a plate or something like that over the top of it so it gets dark. Remember Divya mentioning a blackout period? That'll mimic the environment of being underneath the soil for the seed. It won't know any better. It'll still think it's underground. And then keep it in a warm spot for the first few days until you see it germinate. Once it's germinated, you want to move it out somewhere to a sunny window in your kitchen or wherever is the warm place of choice in your room or whatever.
So use the entire coconut core, the one.
No, don't use the entire coconut core because it'll be a lot. Just use like maybe a third of it.
Okay.
And then just like put in small bits of water, yeah, and then you can start trying to like break it apart, and what you'll see is it'll expand, and like the actual block will break into what looks like soil. So you can see it on Anam's close-up, top-down view.
So you want to kind of give yourself a layer about a centimeter deep,
Yeah, so
or
the
a centimeter to an inch deep.
The layer doesn't have to be very big.
Okay, so that'll do for now in terms of this one. And you just want to make sure it's evenly spaced because your seeds are going to go on top. So you should have soaked your seeds if they needed to be. If you didn't soak your seeds, use arugula for this step. You're going to go ahead and take your seeds and just sprinkle them on top.
If you want to know how much to put on there, about a half or a third of the actual container size. And then you just spread it apart.
Because you want there to be room in between the seeds so that once they start sprouting, they expand even more. You don't want them to crowd out too much. So just smush them out there and then they're not fussy.
We use water to make it like moist soil, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Exactly. And that's it for the peas. That's all you need to do.
So maybe we'll stop here, and
if whoever needs to leave can leave, but I think there's some tips that we should share. We'll just give you the resources and stuff that you need to know.
We'll just quickly go through
we have giveaways for the Kahoot questions.
Oh, okay. So maybe we'll go into that. We can share after harvesting and storage, but essentially, like we said earlier.
Before we get to that, I just want to talk about sunflowers, just so they know.
Okay, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, if that's okay. Just a really quick note before we move on from the part of growing, that's very simple, and it's basically the same process for whether you're growing in soil or on the paper towel, you're adding your soil. In terms of your using sunflower, this is just one that I want to highlight because it's a little different than the others. When you add water to your sunflowers, we mentioned that any seeds that float to the top are dead and you don't want to use those for your germination. However, in the situation of sunflowers, they're all going to float to the top. All you want to do is add another counterweight on top of them so that they kind of sink into the water like that. And then additionally, when you put them into your final growing container, you want to take a second container that is the same size. Imagine this is filled with your seeds. Imagine that these peas are sunflowers. All you're going to do is put another bowl on top and add some weight on here. And that's going to, this is just in the case of sunflowers, it's going to provide a way for them to push off their shells and also germinate at the same rate as each other. And I have instructions on this in your handout that you'll be getting afterwards, but just so that you're not like caught off guard.
And it'll be a challenge. So anybody who tries to take on the sunflower challenge, let us know. And let us know how growing goes for you. So maybe Nargis, if you want to do the Kahoot, how about we do that right now?
Okay.
Because the rest of the information we'll provide in our handout, and the Kahoot is, I guess, time sensitive.
I have a quick question about the peas, real quick.
Sure.
Wait, so could you just show me again, like how you guys, can you show me again, like, so you're not gonna like submerge the pea seed into the soil, it's just gonna be on the top?
Just
Yes.
a layer on top, on the very top.
And that's gonna be enough? It doesn't need to be submerged in the soil?
No, here, I can show you again with the top-down view.
How deep should we make the soil for the peas? If we're using the ground pot?
If you click on the spotlight video, you can see these are the peas that are fully grown. I've also attached pictures to your handout so you'll see what everything should look like. but you can see the pea seeds are right here on the surface. You don't really need to have them underneath the ground for them to grow. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Also,
Okay.
do we not water them ever? Like we're just
For soil, you need to water it. Keep an eye on it. Look at the color of the soil. Is it drying up and looking flaky? Definitely don't let it reach that point. You want it to be moist.
Can we use the paper towel method for all of these seeds that are provided in the kit?
That's an experiment for you guys to decide. I haven't tried peas on paper towel, but my assumption could be wrong. My assumption is that maybe peas need soil for their roots, but they might be okay.
And for the soil, I have some of the coconut coir left over. Can I put in another container and just sprinkle any seed on top?
You can, yeah, as long as it's soaked, you can use any seed. The only thing that I would advise is once you're finished like growing something in one batch of coconut coir, say like you've grown sunflowers and the seed is ready to be harvested, that time when you're using, you don't want to reuse that coconut coir that's already being used to grow something else. If it has roots of another plant in it, don't reuse it.
Yeah, so that's a big thing. Like once your plant has grown, throw out the soil once you're done, because you can't regrow the microgreen, and the soil needs to, like, has no nutrients left in it, and it can't be cross-contaminated with another microgreen at that point. So just don't regrow in the same soil. Use another batch of the dry coconut coir provided.
So once we harvest the microgreen, it's useless then? It's not going to regrow?
Yeah,
It won't regrow.
it will not regrow.
Peas might regrow, but the taste kind of, experiment with that. The peas will regrow, but my understanding is that they don't taste as good the second time.
The other thing you might want to try doing is, you know, like think about, okay, now that we can't reuse the soil, what can I do with it?
Compost or something.
Okay, so let's get on the Kahoot and let's play it. Have some winners, and if anybody has questions, you can send them off to their email through the PDF provided. Anybody left? Get on. Should we start?
Sorry, just 1 second. I'm just joining.
Anybody else on? So many names not there. Okay. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Start. Well, did I forget to mention it's 10-second questions? 10 seconds. Quick answers, kids. Quick answers.
Well done.
Wow, well done.
Great.
Wow.
Surprising facts. We
Whoa.
do use pesticides for organics.
Mm-hmm. Just a different type of pesticide than what one can think of, probably.
Wow, you guys were actually listening.
Mm-hmm.
Way to go.
Maison stole the lead.
Nice. Super attentive. Oh, it's a tight race.
It's very tight.
Great. Okay, someone knows their stuff. Great.
Yes. I don't know that
You really know. Oh. Great. Bavaria, good job. Amazing. Yeah, wow.
Wow.
Congratulations, guys. You guys get our food t-shirts that we got designed. Great. Okay, how do I get out of this?
We can share screen.
Yeah, we can share our screen.
Okay.
Okay, so just to wrap up, thank you everyone for being here today. And we're hoping that you learned something new and you got to try something new. Please keep us posted on how your growing goes. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us either by email or even on Instagram, whatever you prefer. We will be sharing a journal and to help you track your progress.
So like mentioned, once you're ready to go, you're basically just going to cut the top of your microgreens. For example, if you're growing this radish, you're just going to snip off from the base, and this is basically what you'll have to eat. There's a variety in our resource that we're handing out to you, and we'll share that soon. You'll get instructions on what your plant should look like when it's ready to harvest, as well as some tips, but we want you to maybe share the resource. It's a PDF. This is what you should receive in an email coming right after the event. It's got it broken down by all of the 6 plants that we've shown you how to grow, and it'll include a line with what method you used, what your observations are on the method, what type of recipe, and what your thoughts are on the taste and texture. We want you to describe those to us. We've also created a website which will show you, we'll just, there, that one. My voice can't, there you go. Can you see the website? It's got a lot of information, a step-by-step video, if you need a recap, as well as towards the bottom, it's got some recipe ideas for how you can incorporate this into a meal. But those are just jumping off points. We want you to, again, in your journal, let us know how you end up using each of these seeds. What type of meal you turn it into. Do you put it in a sandwich, or are you creating something super gourmet? I think it's just a little up. And we also have some FAQs on here. So there's the 5 ways to use microgreens, and those are our starting point. So you'll get all of these in the email handout that we give to you guys right after this event ends. And yeah, we'll quick touch point for our next workshop, which is in January. We want everyone to, when we send out our email to you today, can you send me a reply saying, yes, I will be attending. And in our next workshop, we're going to be doing herbs and how to propagate them.
So thank you. Yeah. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for staying the extra 15 minutes. It was a pleasure to talk to everyone. We had some really great discussions, and we hope that we get to keep in touch.
I think we'll leave it up for 5 minutes if you have questions, and then we'll let everyone filter out as they need to. Thank you so much. As well, Nergis, if you had anything else you wanted to add before we finish.
Yeah, but first of all, thank you so much. I think this was great. Of course, I think there are going to be more questions. So everyone, please don't hesitate to keep asking, even now if you're able to. Another thing is I would really request that all of you track your plant progress through your phone videos or however way you want to do it. We can share that. We can do it on Slack if you want. We could share it with Anam and Divya. That would be really great to see how everybody's plants are growing. And feel free to use the other seeds in whatever method you want, just to see, because that'll be great to experimenting and logging what you're doing as well, like a journal for your seed growing. That will also help you in the next 2 workshops that we're going to do, one with Divya and Anam, and maybe you guys can give us a little bit of a breakdown of that workshop. And the third one is your communication. You might need those videos for the communication workshop, so please feel free to share as you go along.
Definitely want to emphasize, if you need help along the way, if you've reached a point where something is not looking right or you want advice, send us a message. We have our email address and we have Instagram, whatever is easier for you to contact us by. Yeah, and then in terms of what we'll be covering in our next workshop, that is about, we want to set you up, this is indoor growing right now in the winter months, but we want to kind of see, we're coming up to March, right? So what are the steps that we want to take for you guys you all said that you're really interested in backyard growing. So how can you plan out your garden, your backyard garden? What plants go well together? For example, tomatoes as well as marigold, having those 2 together have beneficial properties. And so we'll lay out those types of examples, tell you what are really easy vegetables to grow, and then we'll have another hands-on portion again. You'll need to pick up a kit and we'll be showing you how to grow herbs because we still want to continue with the theme of being able to grow indoors. So this is one example. Another example is growing herbs in containers so that you can have those year round. And from there, I think whatever your learnings are, whatever your practices are, I think those will all filter through into workshop number 3.
Lima's just asking if we just put it in front of sunlight.
So for the peas, you have to keep them dark for 3 to 5 days. So what you might want to do is just put a plate on top of the container, or even just some tin foil, anything to kind of just prevent light from getting in for 3 to 5 days. And sorry, what was the other one?
Like for example, if you have this as your peas, you can just take another lid and put it over the top, or put it in a cabinet, like just anywhere dark.
And you want to just check the moisture. So maybe in 2 days, like look at the soil to see how moist it is. And if it's not very moist, just add a little bit of water. Just try not to flood it. Like try and put like small little bits of water in, check if it's damp. For arugula, you want to keep dark for 1 to 2 days. So you still want to, again, put another lid on top for 1 to 2 days to help with that germination. And then once that's done, like you can expose it to light and just keep it in a sunny, warm spot for the remainder of the time, checking for water.
Like we'll share that table, which has all of those steps outlined. I think that'll help you guys all a lot.
Amazing. So yeah, we'll stick around for 5 minutes if anyone has questions, but for everyone else, like have a great weekend. Enjoy your Sunday.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for spending your Sunday with us.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you.
Bye.
That's great. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Oh, thank you.